Hello again. Chapter 4 in our text is my favorite chapter in the book. In this chapter, the author, which is pretty long by the way, the author really pulls together a lot of the things that we've been discussing thus far in the text and adds several new twists and elements to his code to create a more interactive site. And he starts a new template in this chapter, even though a lot of the base coding is the same as what we've seen in the previous chapters. He is building a new map this time, and what you'll do in this chapter is build an interactive national park map for Arches National Park out in Utah. And I think this is a great template that you can use, modify, and customize to your own taste. And it's something that you might want to strongly consider for use in your class project, at least for part of your class project. You can expand the code and modify this, I believe, in a variety of ways and make some really interesting, interactive, kind of touristy type of websites. So um, take a good look at this chapter and practice the material as always. And I'll go through and try to clarify a few things as I come across them in the chapter, and we'll look at the code and things like that. And I'll elaborate in certain places if I think of anything that's useful. So we'll start. In chapter 4, on the first page here, he jumps right into the code, and he gives you some initial HTML. He calls it the XHTML code for your first file, and it's just a real basic. Mainly introduces the new title of your page, and he doesn't even include the key here in this code. And just remember, if you're not putting your site online, you don't have to have a key again. So that's good. And we're using, just like before, one CSS file and one JavaScript file. And the only thing new he includes here is he adds a sidebar to the map. So your map is no longer taking up 100% of your screen now. You're going to have a sidebar with this code. And then in that sidebar, he puts a title for Arches and the National Park visitor information. And then he jumps into the CSS code, and in the CSS code he modifies it just a little bit by adding some information for your sidebar. And there's information that tells up like the percentage of the screen that is your regular screen versus sidebar and so forth. I wouldn't worry too much about understanding all of this. I would just use this as it is for now. The CSS code is pretty solid, and you don't really have much adjusting to do in there. Even if you customize it to your own use, a lot of that you can keep. And then he gives you an initial JavaScript file. And he modifies this JavaScript file quite a few times in the chapter, so I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll just try to hit the highlights and basically work our way to the end, to the last set of JavaScript code, and so you can see the finished product there. But he does set the map to be a physical map, which remember is your terrain map. I'm trying to highlight as I go along here in the book. And we've of course got a new lat and long position. And again, the default is going to come up with your terrain map this time. And it's zoomed in to a pretty high level of zoom to focus on just the Arches area and as far over as Moab, which is a little community next to Arches. And the comments are interesting in this chapter. Again, I would read through these JavaScript comments. I think you'll pick up some stuff. He talks about actually comment code here in two different ways that you can add a comment to your JavaScript coding. And I've mentioned one in an earlier video, namely the one that uses the 2 forward slashes. And that works fine as long as you've only got one line of code that you're wanting to comment out. But if you have some multiple lines at any point, or if you want to add some details, some notes, if you tweak the code and adjust it to your own liking, you might want to record some notes and thoughts that you had to explain why you did what you did. And if it takes up multiple lines, then you can comment it out this way with a forward slash and an asterisk, and end it with an asterisk and a forward slash. And that can be useful. I really encourage you to add comments to your code. I can tell you firsthand that it really helps when you've worked with this for a while and then you step away from it for some time and you come back to it. This is a good way of reminding yourself why you did what you did in your coding. Because it can get pretty complicated. As you'll see in this chapter, we're going to get up to a lot of lines of code in just our JavaScript file alone. So your notes is a good thing. And here's what the page should look like whenever you execute the first JavaScript file. And I'm going to switch screens here and show you mine. And what I did, again, remember I've got my windows open and such that I've got my file listing here on the upper left, I've got my browser on the upper right, and then I've got my Notepad++ open down here below. And I've loaded this first HTML file, and I can go through and load the CSS file and the initial JavaScript file in there as well. So I can switch back and forth real easily and follow along with what he's explaining in the book. And so when I drag and drop the HTML file in my browser, this is the screen I get. If I maximize it, you can see we've got our sidebar over here to the right, just a basic simple sidebar at this point with just some introductory information there at the top. We've got our terrain map, which looks pretty nice. And in looking at it, you can see Moab over here, and you can see arches. And the zoom is sufficient here, but the centering of the screen was based on my little window that I had before. So if I refresh it, it should move everything to position the way he has it in the book. So there you can see arches is pretty much in the center, and you can see Moab down here to the lower right. So we've got a base map started here that he is going to build upon in the chapter. So if we go back to the book and go on down, he introduces several new things in the chapter. One, he talks about custom marker icons. Instead of your little standard red marker with the black dot in the middle, he has pre-made some icons for you and shows you how to use those. Using icons is very tricky in the Google API. And using the JavaScript code. What I would recommend for now is to stick with what he has until you get comfortable with all of your code, and then you might go through and try to make your own little icon and substitute it for what he has done here and see if that works. But chapter 9 in the book is dedicated to a lot more detail about custom icons. So notice that the author has the icons in a subfolder called markers. So when he writes his sample code here, which he's not showing in the context of the JavaScript yet, but he's just showing it just the individual code items to let you know how he's going to go about creating an icon. Basically what he does is he creates a new icon, a new variable called white icon. Okay, and then he sets that new white icon variable to the default Google icon. And then he goes down here, and with this white icon image, he sets it to use, he sets that default icon to use the image that he's got stored in the markers folder. So we're using Google's default icon, but then we're changing the color of it basically by overriding that one with this image that he has created. Okay. So it's still going to have the behaviors of the Google icon, and that it will be that we can attach info windows to it and that kind of thing. But he's using an image to basically override it with this white icon image that he has. And then he shows how you would put that in the context of actually putting it in with your JavaScript. So he creates a variable called entrance marker. And on entrance marker, then he creates a coordinates variable, and then he sets the entrance marker to be located where those coordinates are and to take on the icon of the white icon variable that he created. And then that's added, that entrance marker is added to the map with this overlay command. And again, he talks a little bit more about the markers and the icons in some of the dialogues here. And then he goes through and he creates two other markers, basically two black ones. This first one a white one, and then he goes through and he creates two more that are black, and it's for two different locations in the park that he's also going to place a point. And notice in the code that, let me scroll to the next page. Again, he uses, and I like this. I like this format. He uses a bold to identify the new code within the JavaScript. And so you can see that he creates the black icon, but he only has to do it once because he's just basically creating a black icon that he can use. Then he reuses that twice to set both the delicate arch marker, I'm highlighting there, and to set the Windows marker. So once you create the icon, you can reuse it as many times as you want. So he only has to create it once. And then he talks a little bit about strings, which basically it's important to remember that you got to use either single or double quotes. You can use either one around any text strings in your JavaScript code. And in this case, the text string or the strings that he's talking about is the reference to the image file that he used for the icons. And then he wants to begin to populate the sidebar with some information. So he puts those same markers that we used before, he creates those that he's already created, he reuses those on the sidebar. And this formatting here basically just puts it populates the sidebar with some text and with icons beside the text. And that's what it's doing here. And then he has to expand the style sheet for the sidebar as well. And so that's what you've got in the code that I'm highlighting here, is basically some just general formatting to structure the sidebar a little more detail. And here's what it will look like when you get done with that. So you can see we've got our map, we've got three icons on it, white one and two black ones, and then on the sidebar he now has some detail. You can think of it like a legend. He uses the same icons again, and then he puts the text beside it that they're representing. So you got the visitor center with the white icon, and then you've got two trailhead entrances with the black icon, delicate arch and the Windows trailhead. And we are up to, if I go to our code, we are now up to the 04-5. So I'm going to drag this 04-5 HTML in here, and we should get what we were just seeing in the book there. And I can refresh that just so everything's centered properly. And there you go. We've got the markers on the map, but they're just markers right now. See, if I click on them, nothing's happening. So my mouse turns into a pointer, but when I click on it, nothing happens because we haven't assigned any kind of action to take place yet with those markers. And on the sidebar, nothing is clickable right now. It's just basically text and graphics on the sidebar. So then what he does in the book is he goes through and he starts to make some interactivity with these items. So the next section is probably, to me, one of the most powerful features that we've encountered yet, is that he goes through and he shows how you can add some interactivity to your map for the users in a couple creative ways. The first one is using a map blowup, which is basically just a focus area. You could think of like having a magnifier to go over your map with. You can have a little pop-up map that comes up that he associates it with the visitor center icon. So they call this literally a blowup map, and the info window contains the blowup map basically here with the code. And so he shows you that how to add that code in this listing 4.7. If we scroll down to where there's stuff in bold, you can see here that he has what we call a listener event, an event listener. And he sets the entrance marker, which is what we used again for the visitor center, to where when you click on it, then it's going to execute this code for entrance click. Okay, and enter this function rather for entrance click. And if you go to the end of the code, you can see that function. And he puts a little comment line in there that tells you, basically entrance click will open the map detail info window showing the park entrance area up close. And then he has to assign to the entrance marker what the blow-up map is, what characteristics a blow-up map is going to have. So he sets it to the normal Google map, and he sets a pretty close-up zoom level of 14. And then he explains a little bit about what the event listeners are. And let's take a look at that and see how that looks. And there you can see that it pops up with just basically another window of a map. And that map is, you can move the map around. It's got the same features. It's even got a zoom in and zoom out button. So it's got the same features your regular map has. It's just in a smaller window, and it's set to be the regular map instead of the terrain map. So kind of neat, and you can switch from that. He even includes the tabs on there where you can switch and go into a satellite map or terrain map or back to the regular map. So you literally have a second Google map on your original map at this point that you can bring up with just a click. Okay. Then he adds some more interactivity by adding, instead of just your regular info window, you can add tabbed info windows. Now, I really like this because I can see where this gives you a lot more power to add more features to your map. You basically, as the diagram shows here, you can associate the info window in a way that when it comes up, here he's got a tab for a photo and a tab for details about the hike. Okay, now this begins to get a little complicated in the coding though, and the coding gets pretty long at this point. But it's really important stuff, so take a look at this really close. And notice that he does something different here. He switches, he puts this code that he uses to populate the info window in with the HTML file. And he points out that that's really a more suitable place for it because it's really markup information that's going into the info window itself. Now the code that will actually initiate the info window and stuff, some of that is still in your JavaScript. So it's important to keep in mind that your HTML file and your JavaScript file are interacting, okay? In the past, we've mainly looked at it like the HTML file opens up the JavaScript. But now you realize that you can actually call functions that are embedded in the JavaScript. You can call those from your HTML file. So it shows how the two are really interactive. And there's even a little bit of JavaScript that eventually gets into the HTML file as well. So read this section pretty carefully and just take note how he's got it set up. So here he's showing you just the information that's going to be put into the HTML file that has to deal with the info windows. And you can see that if you, and notice how he indents the tags here. So we've got a div tag with an ID that tells us this is going to be info window content. And then we've got a second level div tag that deals with the delicate arch details. And within those delicate arch details, we set both of the info windows. The one that has the actual details of that's going into the details window, and then the text that goes with that as well. And then the same with the photo that will eventually go with the photo tab. And so each of these gets set up. So there's 4 windows altogether because you've got 2 markers, each with 2 tabs. So you've got to set all 4 of that information up. And you can see why it is better suited to put it in the HTML file because it is using these HTML tags. The P, for example, with brackets around it is for paragraph. And then he's got a paragraph of information about that hike. And then he closes that tag with the /P. Then he starts another paragraph right below that one where he tells a little bit more information of, make sure you bring water on your hike and things like that. And then he sets up the content for the other tab to be a photo, and he tells the name that's going to be used for that photo. There's a line of code that basically puts a header text atop of that photo. So you do have a line of text in there and then the photo. And he sets the size of the photo up to be 300 by 225. He sets the ALT, like we talked about in the previous video, about how if some users might not have their browser set up to open photos, and nearly everybody does nowadays, but there was a time where it could noticeably speed your browser up if you didn't load the photos. Or if just for some reason the photo doesn't want to load, then this alt text, which says delicate arch, would appear instead. So the user would at least know what was something to do with delicate arch was supposed to be there. And then finally, you've got the source file, the file name, where that's located. And notice here, it doesn't have any path information, and that's because the photo is located right in the area where the files are. So you can see the photo up here, the delicatearch.jpg, and it's in the same subfolder as our code. So we don't have to put any path information in there in that case. Now, if that photo existed on your website or some other website or on Flickr or wherever, then you would need to include in the path the reference information to be able to find that. So again, here we have the photo in our folder already, so we don't have to do that. So he sets all four of those up with that set of code, and that's eventually going to get added to the HTML file. And he explains a little bit about that. And then he goes through the CSS file again and makes some changes in there that basically sets up some of the formatting for these info windows. And then he begins to talk in this section here about how you're going to actually open those info windows. So, you've got the code in the HTML file, but the way it's set up set up to where it's not opening by default. It's waiting for you to click on something and then it will open. And so you have to have code in your JavaScript that's going to actually open those tabs and make that info window a tabbed type format. So he introduces this new object called a GInfo window tab, and that's taking the place basically of what we used previously for the I think it was called info window HTML or something like that was the object we had been using before, where we just had one bubble pop up. And then he explains a little bit about this get element ID, which is basically the command here when that info window gets executed. It tells it to go back into the HTML file and pull out this stuff that's in quotes, which is your specific content for each of the tabs, the delicate arch tabs and the Windows tabs. And then he says for completeness, he shows you the entire set of code that he has set up for the JavaScript. Okay. And it's getting pretty long now at this point. We've got 2 full pages worth of code now. And in bold, you can see where he set those GInfo window tabs that we just looked at a minute ago. And he does that for each of the delicate arch hike, which has 2 of them, and then the Windows hike, which has 2 of them. And he points out how you can reuse variables. For example, he has to create a variable for the tabs in order to put that GInfo window tab information into. But he only has to do that once. So you notice he does it here. He's got a VAR in front of tabs. And he creates the GInfo window tab for the delicate arch. Then when he sets up the tab for the Windows, he doesn't have to create that variable any longer because he already has a variable called tabs. And he just basically repopulates that variable with this new information, and then it will spool over to the map whenever it's executed. So it's getting a little more complicated here now, and because this is not a programming class per se, I'm not expecting you to memorize all of this by any means, but it is important that you kind of have an idea of what's going on. And even if you don't understand all of it, give it a shot and try to understand as much as you can of it. And like I said earlier, these windows or these shaded dialogues that he has in here will tell you a lot of the background information. That's really helpful, I think. And the fact that he puts stuff in bold, that draws your attention to the new stuff in the code, which is good. And so then you can see what this looks like. You get the tabs that come up. You've got your tabbed info windows. They're associated with that point. At this point, though, we still haven't done much with the sidebar. But before we go any further, let me just check and make sure that my code is working like his code. And if we pull let me maximize my window here and refresh it. And you see that if you click, you've got your map on this white icon, but if you click on either of these black icons, then it opens up the tabbed info window, and it's got this, and the details tells you a little bit about the hike. Remember, we use the formatting in there in both some in the HTML and some in the CSS file to set up how this is going to look. And then you can click on the other tab and it shows you a nice photo. And you've got the name of that feature at the top of the photo. Now, one of the things he doesn't really do here that you might want to apply, if you take the video that we had previously where we extended the Chapter 3 discussion, I demonstrated how you could add hyperlinks to your info windows. So it's possible, if you like, to add a hyperlink even to an image. And I think I pointed you in the last video to some of the code in the tutorial, HTML tutorial, that would, I think, help you to do that here if you so choose. And you can also tie that to, even more easily, you can tie it to any of the information in the details here. So if you wanted to, for example, make the Windows trail hyperlinked to a more detailed description of that somewhere, that's a textual based description, or maybe you want to create a page somewhere else that has photos of the trail along with descriptions and more detail basically than what you could show here in an info window, then you can create that page or find one if there's one already existing. Maybe the park already has one set up that you want to use that you liked or something. Or maybe you just got a link to an interesting article about the Windows trail that you wanted to link to. Either way, you could set up a link here in this title for the Windows trail to where when you click on that, it could take you to that information. So that's something you might want to try. He doesn't really do that here, but I think it's a real handy extension of what he's trying to demonstrate here. So we've got the windows. Let's just make sure the other one opens. And this one's the Delicate Arch Trail. And you've got a picture of the nice Delicate Arch. Beautiful spot. If you haven't got to visit there, I highly recommend it. It's every time I've been to the Arches Park, I always make it a point to hike that trail up to the Delicate Arch. It's what, 2.5 or 3 miles, I think it's about 3 miles round trip, and it's a pretty good little climb up to it, but it's not that difficult, and it's a great hike. It's a kind of one of those hikes you'll always remember, even if you only do it once. You'll always remember that hike. The feature here, the arch, is setting right on the edge of a cliff. The view that you're getting of it here, you might not know that, but if you go over to the arch and look down, it's very close to the edge of a big cliff, and you can appreciate why it's called Delicate Arch when you look at it up close. So anyway, we've got that information on our map, but we still don't have any interactivity with the sidebar over here, and that's what the next section of the book does. As he starts building into where you could click on the title information here on the sidebar and get these info windows to open up just like you can by clicking on the map. So for example, as he points out, right now, because there's no labels here, we don't know. We see Delicate Arch over here, but we don't know which one of these is Delicate Arch without clicking on them first to see. So you'd just be guessing at that point. So if we could somehow add some interactivity here on the sidebar that made these clickable, then you could click on the name Delicate Arch and it would open the appropriate tab for us, the info window tab. So that's what the next section of the book does. And I'll let you read in the book to kind of, you can see how he explains that in the book. And he's got the code in there again. He adds to this sidebar code to create, basically it refers back to the event that we created earlier that that opens up those tabbed info windows. All he's doing is he associates basically a hyperlink reference to each of those titles in the sidebar. And then when you click on those, he basically is setting some dummy code here. If you notice, he's got href equals, and it's just a pound sign. And the pound sign is basically not going to take you anywhere. It would keep you on the same page that you're at when you clicked on it. So your browsers open up your map, you've got the sidebar, and if it followed this link, it really wouldn't go anywhere because it would stay on that page. And that's what he's trying to accomplish, because he doesn't really want you to go to a hyperlink from the sidebar. He just wants you to have a hyperlink on the sidebar that when you click on it, it executes the code that we wrote earlier, the same code that gets executed when you click on the marker. And in this case, though, you can associate the actual code that's needed for that marker with that same reference. So that's how he can basically get the information into the proper location. So like for visitor center, the text visitor center that you see on the sidebar, you can specifically say execute this entrance marker code whenever you click on the hyperlink that I'm setting up on visitor center. And that's basically what happens for all three of the markers here. And that's how he associates them with the map. So it's a little tricky, a little creative on his part there, I think, to do it that way. But it's really handy for us, because what it does and what you end up with then is something like this. Let me make sure I've got it working here. And we'll go through, and I believe it's 0413. Yes, and notice how if I go back to the previous view, notice over here on the right, you don't see any lines under any of this text, and none of it, when I hover over it, is clickable. So when I do the next level map, you'll see the lines coming up, the code turns blue, or the text turns blue, and when I move my mouse over it, you can see it turns into a little hand. And so I can click on any of these now, and it executes the command structure to open the proper tabbed info window that goes with that. So very handy. I like this a lot. I think this is kind of the end point of where you want to go with all of this. Now this specific file also shows some of the other stuff that he shows in the chapter a little later as well. So I got a little bit ahead of the game there by opening that one, but at least it demonstrates the sidebar over here properly. After adding the tabbed info window and the content, the author then goes on in the chapter to demonstrate how you can add some external content. Now this we've seen before in the previous chapters, where we brought in some KML files from another source on a different website outside of our control. And then I've demonstrated how you can upload the KML files to your own site, such as a Google site, and consume that KML in your code from there as well, which gives you a little more control over it, because oftentimes you created the KML files yourself in that case, or you've downloaded them from somewhere and placed them on your site. So that's what this next section of the chapter does. And in this case, he adds basically just one KML file that is his own source, actually, from another I guess, I don't know if it's a business or not, but it looks like he has a website set up, the author does, that has information about satellite availability at campgrounds across the U.S. And it's tailored for RV users and tent campers and such. And on that site, he must have created some KML content for the locations of where these campgrounds occur. And so you can see here, I've got the book loaded again, and you can see that he's, let me zoom in just a little bit more here. You can see that, that he's loaded another layer here in addition to the markers that we created, and the info window bubbles that pop up has information about the feature, and it has a hyperlink to the feature, like we demonstrated in the Chapter 3 extended discussion, how you could create hyperlinks within the info window bubbles. And in this case, you have you don't really have any control over the KML content that he created. So it's nice that he added that feature for us. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and it's very interesting because in making this video I encountered this, so I wanted to bring it up. I started this video last night, and whenever I tried to demonstrate with the code this feature here, I could not get his KML layer to load for some reason. And in doing some investigating, I found out that it must have been because his site was down at that time for the moment or something, because this morning I've come back into the office and picked up where I've left off and everything's working fine. And I ruled out several things with the coding. I first thought, well, maybe I had to have the Google key, even though I'm running it from the desktop, which would not be consistent with what we've talked about before. And I tried putting my key in just in case, and it didn't make any difference. And I also have this code loaded on 2 or 3 different websites and 2 different computers, so I'm testing it from different environments. And I tried all of the options, and it still wouldn't work. So I know there was something going on. And then when I come in this morning, and lo and behold, it's working, then I can safely say that the site must have been down for some reason last night. Which brings up the point I wanted to make, is that when you are consuming KML content from another source, remember the advantage there is that you're truly making a mashup. So you're combining external data with data you've created yourself, or features in this case like we've done with the info windows that you've actually designed into your own coding, which is nice. So you can add external content and create a true mashup. The downside to that is you don't have any control to where the source where that's coming from. If their server goes down for some reason, then the code's not going to pop up on your map. I guess the only good thing about that is your map will still work, and it will show the stuff that you have put on there or that you have control over that you can fix. So at least the map does still work. It just won't show any content that's down for the moment, as it was when I tried to make this the first go round last night. So I just wanted to bring that up. And now let me show you the map that has the latest version of the HTML file we've been working with loaded. And I've loaded this from my desktop, but I also have this code on my server as well, so I can show you that it does indeed work in both places. So first the desktop, and let me just refresh this. Hopefully everything will come up okay. And this is truly bizarre because I just tested this before starting the video and it was working fine. When I refresh my window, lo and behold, the external KML content is not coming up again. So just like we were just talking about, there's something must be going on with the website where that code is coming from. Now I've refreshed it a couple times just to see if there's something to do with the internet. Maybe it's coming through slowly or something, but it's still not coming up. And I can turn on and off the little checkbox that the author created that enables you to load and unload that KML file, which was another feature that he added in this chapter, and it doesn't seem to be making a difference. So luckily I still have it in my memory from the other window I have here where I loaded from my server. Okay, and what I had done was I put the code up on my server like we had done with chapter 3. And now keep in mind, when you put it on a server, you do have to have your key, your API key, in your HTML file. So in order for it to work, and I made sure that was the case and loaded it up there. And so you can see the content is loaded, and I can click on one of them and it will pull up the info bubble for that part, or for that campground, which happens to be in Arches National Park in this case. And if I follow the link that he's created here, it will take me to yet another website, hopefully, and which will have as one that he created. It's opening in my second window, so let me let it load here and then I'll move it over. And it's basically a website that the author has set up, as I mentioned before, where he has information about campgrounds and satellite availability and so forth. And it's interesting because the website is not loaded. There it goes. The website was very slow to load which makes me a little suspicious that there might be something going on with his website, which may be what's causing our KML to not load properly. So here's the website. I've moved it over, and you can see that he's got a similar windows we've been using with the campground location, but then he's got details added to this site, telling us that I guess the last report was in 2003, looks like, so it's obviously not been updated in a while, and tells information about the campsite, that it's a primitive campsite, and the length of the RV, how big of an RV truck and camper you can get in there. Coverage rating is good, and the satellite at 99 degrees. So this is just an external website that he has created, but it demonstrates how you can use external KML, follow the info window bubbles, and if they've got links in them, you can go to other websites, which is what we were doing in Chapter 3. But just realize you can add that to your map still, even with the material you're working on in Chapter 4. So pretty neat stuff. But again, remember, you don't have any control over that KML file. So I'm going to refresh this window just out of curiosity, and if my suspicions are right, it will not reload the KML file unless something is changed with whatever issue was going on. So let's refresh it, and indeed it's not loading right now. So it's kind of nice in a way that this is doing this right now, because I can demonstrate to you what happens if how it looks if something like that happens. And there's not a lot you can do about it. You know, you can keep refreshing, come back periodically and check. There's obviously an issue going on with that website right now, and it's not wanting to let us hit the code. And like I say, it was a little slow to load when I went to the external link just a minute ago. So it makes me think you could probably keep refreshing several times, and you might eventually get it to load. So something's going on with that website that's causing that, but it makes a good point there, I guess, for you to consider when you're using external KML content. But there were some neat things there with it, though, as you saw. And remember, you always have the option here with the feature he added to the sidebar to be able to turn it on and off, to uncheck that. By default, it opens with it turned on. And on my end, I experimented a little bit because I was assuming, well, sometimes people might not want it to turn on automatically. You might, the whole idea was to have that content available if you want it. So why not set it up when your page loads to where by default does not pop up? In other words, this little box would not be checked. And I've experimented with that a little bit on my end and had very mixed results. It seems like, for some reason, in order to execute properly, the JavaScript, it wants it to load the first time, and then you can turn it off and back on just fine. But I've not had much success with getting it to load without pulling that up the first time and then checking the box to turn it on and get it, like say, getting it to work then. So try that on your end and see what kind of success you have. And the worst case scenario, you go with the defaults, which is to turn it on automatically, and then you can simply just uncheck it to turn it off. And then it does come back on fine after that. So that's another little twist in there to think about. And some of these little glitches might be something to do with the version 2 of the API. You would hope they would be fixed in version 3. But they're not serious enough to keep us from using it right now. It's just interesting to be able to point out some of those weaknesses. Now remember, our sidebar is working. We can click on everything else anyway, the stuff that we created. We can click on the sidebar and it opens our info window bubble for this trail information. And we've got the tabbed info window we can switch to and see the image. And as I mentioned before, you might want to experiment with making this image clickable by adding a hyperlink there to something else, just to demonstrate to yourself that you can add a hyperlink to an image as well as to text. And we talked about this in the Chapter 3 extended video a little bit. So refer to that if you have any questions there. And we'll keep on top of the issue here with the KML not loading. It's kind of interesting. But I'm convinced that there's something going on with the website, because I've tried it again from multiple avenues on my end, from my desktop, from a server, from another website I have it set up on, experimenting with the Google API key and that kind of thing. And so I'm pretty convinced that the problem lies in the website coming from where that KML is referenced. Now, a couple other features that he brings up in the book, and then we'll wrap up here, is let me scroll through. He shows you a lot of code, which, by the way, is what you've built up thus far. You can appreciate how far you've come by looking at this full 2 pages worth of code for the JavaScript now, and hopefully you'll be able to understand it as you read through it because of the work that you've put in the previous chapters and in this chapter. So hopefully this will make sense. You can see in bold here the only new thing he had added was that KML link we were just working with. And here's the function that toggles the campgrounds on and off. And this is what I was telling you about on my end. I've played with it a little bit to try to set it up to where by default they're turned off instead of turned on. And see, he's got this option checked here. And you would think that it would be a matter of just simply either setting it to unchecked or no or something like that. But it doesn't seem to work quite right on my end when I try it. So you see what you get, and like I say, the worst case, leave it like it is and just turn it off if you want to, if you don't want it to be on once the page loads. But you can see he uses the GOXML show command and the hide command to execute turning that on and off. And then some finishing touches that he adds here. One of them is pretty neat. He adds a local search bar, a Google search bar, to the map, and demonstrates here in the book how it works. And let me just show you live how it works because that feature should still be working on our site. Let me refresh it and to see if the KML will come up. No, still not getting the KML file, so not quite sure what's going on there. But it's something to do with the website, obviously. If you notice in the lower left corner, though, here, this toolbar, or the search toolbar, is popped in here. And the only thing that he had to do to add that is really simple, is this one line of code to enable what they call the Google bar. Okay? And in the book, he shows you where to put that and everything in the code. But once it's on your map, though, you can search for things, and it will show them around the area your map is showing. So we've got a town called Moab near the park here. Let's just see if there are any Burger Kings in the area. And indeed, they do have one in town, which I knew already, which is why I used that to test it with. But it looks like it works. And it's kind of neat. It pops up in the bar, a little information here about it, tells you the address and so forth. And it is clickable on both ends. You've got the little marker here that pops up, and it's got the address, phone number here. You can even get directions if you want to. So that's kind of neat. And if you click on the hyperlink they've given you, it will take you to another website that looks like Google has set up for different companies, and Burger King must be in their list because it pops up and it tells you again information about that specific location, and then it has reviews. So looks like 4 different reviews people have given it. So that's kind of neat. So you can add all of that with just one little line of code. You can add that functionality to your map. So users might appreciate that. It looks like 3 out of 4 thought it was a pretty good restaurant. So anyway, that's another thing to consider that's useful. So you might or might not want to pop the search bar in your map. And notice that you can clear the results. Sometimes it gets a little unwieldy. You get a lot of stuff on your map. You can just click the clear results here, and that will wipe everything off and put your search bar toolbar back like it was, which is very neat. So he adds that, and then the last thing in the chapter is he enables another type of map, which is the Google Earth map, into the top menu bar. You'll notice in the past we've only had the map, satellite, hybrid, and terrain. Well, now you've got this Earth button, which it works somewhat. There's a little bit of clunkiness to it, I've noticed, but here in our live map, you can see we do have the Earth button. And now for this to work, the user has to have an optional program that they can download that lets Google Earth run within your browser window. Okay, because that's what's going to happen here is it will start Google Earth in the browser window if you have that utility. Okay, if not, it will prompt you to go get that. So users can still use that feature. They'll be prompted automatically to go get that if they want it. But it works, like I say. What happens is I notice some of the features go away. Like I believe we're going to lose our search bar if I'm not mistaken. And if the KML layer had loaded, I can't remember if you can still see that or not. In the book, he shows it in the picture, but it seems like it gave me some problems. But since it's not loading, we won't be able to test that right now. But I can switch over to the Google Earth mode just to show you that it does work. And it takes it just a minute to load for the first time. And it's very similar to just the version you have on your desktop. But notice in this case, and the KML file is loading here. So that is interesting. In this case, we saw the Earth globe that you typically see first for just a second, and then it popped right in or zoomed right into the location of interest. And you see our search bar did go away there, so we lost that, but we do have the KML file that's showing up now. And that's interesting that it's showing up now. Is probably just coincidence. We'll know in a minute because we'll switch back to our other map. But you can see that it is loading, and you have your typical, our markers are still here, by the way, too. And but we don't have the tabbed info window. If you notice that, that's one change. For some reason, that tabbed info window apparently is not working in Google Earth mode. So we don't have the pictures, but we do have the description there. So make sure you load your most important information in that first window, I guess, would be the rule of thumb there. And it lets us know that we're in Google Earth down here in the lower right. And we can zoom in just like you can with the typical Google Earth. And once you get to a certain point, it will go into the 3D mode. Well, actually, it's not quite wanting to there, but we can put it in it by using the controls over here like you've done before. So I'll do that, and notice you can see one of our markers still right there. When I click on it, though, for the bubble to pop up, if you notice, it switched back out of 3D mode real quickly to show the bubble there, the info window. So it works. It can be a little clunky, but I don't think it would detract too much from the overall experience. One thing I've noticed when it refreshed here, we don't have the KML file just popped up. I started to say we don't have the KML file again, but it took it a minute and it did load finally. So strange what's going on with that. And we can go back to where we were, back into the terrain map mode. Click that option, and our search bar comes back. Okay, and our KML file is still not showing up. So very strange. I'm going to just zoom it in just a little bit to make a change in the map and see if it pops up then when it reloads, but it's not showing up. So not quite sure what's going on with that. So that's the other thing that he added, was the option to use Google Earth to the site, and that pretty much wraps up the chapter. So what he does next is he gives you a summary that shows you all of your code in its entirety again. And remember, you're working with 3 files still. He had bits and pieces of codes throughout the chapter that he then tucked it in the appropriate file here at the end so you can see it all together. And you are working with this listing 4.3, which is the HTML file. And if you look in the code, you'll notice that the CSS file he's referencing is the 0409, which is what we're using on our last version that I've been demonstrating. And for the JavaScript, the 0414. And just so you can see those files, I do have them loaded here in my notepad, where you can see the references are in there, and they're getting rather long now. So what you might want to do is spend some time kind of looking through them, and you might have to switch back and forth to previous chapters to refresh yourself with what certain functions do. But try to walk through these the best you can, and just make sure you have a pretty good idea what's going on in the code. And once you have a good idea of what's going on, you'll be able to tweak this and customize it to your own needs. So try that. Spend some time with this. It takes a while, and it doesn't help when you run into the little issues like we've been seeing with certain layers not loading and so forth. But sometimes that can be a good thing because it helps you to follow the logic through. Like I noticed I had refreshed this, but if you notice I had turned off my layer over here, I just realized that. So if I turn it back on, let's see if it's working now. Probably not, but it definitely wouldn't have shown up with that turned off. So I think it's just something with the website that is going on there that's just causing it to load sporadically. So anyway, try it with some of your own KML. That's be a neat thing to do, and make sure everything's working okay there. And then begin to maybe customize it to what you're going to use for your project. You might, if you've selected a park, for example, you might try to customize this for your park by just switching the appropriate places in the code with the information that you would use, and see how it works. Give it a try, and I think you'll find this very interesting once you work with it a little while. So with that, I'm going to stop and let you practice and enjoy it, and we'll be back with you again soon.